Okay, well, we're going to get started. My name is Charles Branham. I'll be the moderator tonight. Uh, this Zoom meeting is about uh, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What does it mean to the Black community? And what is the struggle around this issue? Presenting tonight will be Dr. Dana Murray Patterson, professor at Wingate University, vice president of student life, uh, director Malkin, Josh Malkin, who is the director of advocacy for the American Civil Liberties Union, South Carolina. Uh, I'm sorry, per, Pastor Benton of the Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church is excused. He had other commitments. Uh, I'd like to get started. If Dr. Murray's ready, you can go ahead and make your presentation. It is being recorded, and afterwards we'll have a question and answer period with so few people participating so far.
Now, were you referring to Dr. Malkin or Dr. Murray Patterson?
Dr. Murray Patterson.
Okay. All right. Yes, absolutely. If I could share my screen,
Yes.
by the way, and I think I can, so I will turn that on there. And are you all able to see my screen? And let me see if I can do something to make this not so okay. And then I'll just move those as well too. So first of all, good evening to everyone that's on the call. I just have a short presentation, and I appreciate the invite from Mr. Branham. And my topic tonight was to talk a little bit about how anti-DEIB, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives are impacting Black families in general. But a lot of this really does center on young people and the youth. And since I work in higher education, as you might imagine, a lot of this also centers around education. I've been a practitioner in higher ed for over 35 years. And so I bring quite a lot of experience, I think, with higher education entities in general, but I've also served with the NAACP as a past president. And so I think that my understanding of how this links to the greater community is also relevant in this space. So I'll just share that. And my first slide here just is something that I took from an article that I was researching to get some of my information. And this boot just sort of left me with definitely an emotional impact when I saw this. And I wanted to just stop for a second and see if anyone else has an emotional impact to this. And I'd like to hear from anyone if you want to express just how this makes you feel.
I would say it seems to be a jackboot crushing DEI, and it makes me feel that it's an attack. And I also get the sense that it involves Project 2025. I mean, that's me being uneducated as a layman.
Well, that's a pretty good answer there. Thank you for that. Does anyone else have any other thoughts or sort of visceral emotions that come up for you when you look at this? Okay. Well, thank you again to Mr. Branham for your insight there. Again, it sort of occurred to me that not only is the flag in the background very much so American, also DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, is also painted in the American and styled and decorated in the American flag. So to me, that might make the assumption that it's also very American. So it's like the very core and the foundation of America is being crushed by some of the anti-DEI efforts that are happening. So when you think about sort of where some of these efforts are happening, as of February the 19th, I believe, was the last time that I took this poll, but legislation has officially passed in 12 states. And those states include Alabama, Florida, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, North Carolina, where we are right now, or at least many of us are, North Dakota, Kansas, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. And the impact and the trend is continuing to spread. Some of the consequences that are coming from the loss of the DEI legislation include loss of resources, and that is everything from people to finances to buildings to space. Also the erosion of representation, as we can see that many people are feeling like there is no representation, and there's also no urgency around making sure that that places or the bodies that are being represented, that the leadership looks like the bodies that they're representing. So for instance, the leadership of the United States should be reflective of the folks in the United States. And if you look at many colleges and universities, their student populations don't mirror what the leadership looks like. And this anti-DEI effort, I think, continues to erode that idea. There's also an impact on mental health. If you think about it, many of us, and I asked you for your emotional reaction earlier to the boot and the crushing boot, because I know that for many people, there's just been a very visceral, emotional reaction to everything that has happened. So not only are many people experiencing isolation or seclusion, depression, anxiety around some of these issues, but overall, people are just feeling disconnected from other people. And then also the final consequence here is just to look at diminished educational opportunities. A lot of the practices and procedures and DEI policies were put into place in order to try to help correct some of the wrongs that had been occurring as a very long process of systemic inequities and oppression. And now these resources were put in place as one of the ways to try and reverse the damage done by that. And so we're seeing that we are definitely in a state where people are equating a lot of these consequences with, they're only targeting very, very few examples of DEIB, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you think about intersectionality is the ways in which several different identities might play out in one body, and how those different identities might also have like an extra portion of discrimination against them. So for example, if you think about how many of these anti-DEI legislations are targeting not just Black people, but also women, LGBTQ+, people that are differently abled, and then also first generation. And so when you think about that, if someone were to hold all of those identities, they are definitely feeling the brunt of this anti-legislation, and they may be feeling especially targeted right now just because of the intersecting identities that they wear, which is a part of their everyday experience. So while we may see it as sort of being a single pinpoint, like this is affecting female, this is affecting LGBTQ, imagine someone that holds all of these identities and how it might affect them. So short term, the termination of DEI programs result in immediate loss of resources and support for African-American families and children. And when we talk about those losses, like I said, much of that can be resources like scholarships, mentorships, mentoring programs, counseling services, and many of those things were funded by DEI, again, to try to promote a more uniform use of those resources and not to keep one group from accessing them while others could access them. So it wasn't about exclusion, but it was about inclusion and bringing to the table folks that maybe for a long time historically or traditionally had been kept away from many of those resources. And so these are some of the programs short term that are facing cuts. Education, again, the dissemination or termination of DEI programs, they really do exacerbate education disparities, especially among African American children. A lot of the educational programs play a role in promoting diversity and inclusion in schools, ensuring that African American perspectives are represented in educational curriculum and extracurricular activities. Without the initiatives, students may face increased marginalization and exclusion, leading to higher levels of stress, anxiety, and a sense of isolation in the classroom. And this type of heightened stress and isolation has been linked to the concerning increase in Black teens who also dying by suicide. And so again, that sort of is a harsh way to bring that reality to terms, but ultimately, if mental health is not treated and it's not given the attention that it needs, it could really lead to damage that cannot be corrected. Long-term, the termination of DEI programs also has far-reaching impact on African American families and children. It has an opportunity to widen the achievement gap. So while we see many of the equity initiatives that were aimed at trying to shrink the achievement gap between students who were at the same institution, for example, but that maybe did not come in with the same preparation or the same level of preparation background. They're coming from schools that have been differently resourced. And so some students come from schools where they've received a lot of support and a lot of resources that prepared them for college, while other students are coming from schools that had less than enough resources. And so when they come to a college setting, then they're less than prepared to actually deal with the rigor of a college environment. And so also without access to DEI initiatives, African American children may struggle to develop the critical skills and networks necessary for career advancement, and that hinders their economic mobility and their prospects for success in adulthood. So these have far-reaching and long-term impacts as well. And when we think about it from a systemic sort of point of view, was recently reading about how now there is going to be sort of a rollback of the enforcement of the federal government against segregated facilities. And so when you think about that, how much the federal government was a big player in putting into place some safeguards, which is really what they were, to try to make sure that to reinforce the drive to have people not discriminate just based on race or class or gender or any other protected identity or any other identity or affinity that we wear in our bodies or as a part of our lives or that we try and support. So if you think about disparities in healthcare and housing to disparities in the criminal justice system, Black families and children continue to face barriers that hinder their ability to thrive. When you dismantle DEI initiatives, policymakers are further entrenching the inequities and undermining efforts to address systemic racism and promote social justice. So we think that those kinds impacts things like the rollback of segregation is not going to be a problem. Just wait until the first time you walk into a space and realize that there is a waiting room for people of color and there's a waiting room for others. And how that might make us feel in 2025 to walk in and realize that that's the reality of the system that we are a part of. So in order to be solution oriented, just to not leave people with a sense of hopelessness, because I know I don't like to feel hopeless, I wanted to just sort of promote some of the things that are helping to guide solutions, our advocacy efforts. community organizing. I know just recently I attended a community protest that was happening in Asheville, where my daughter lives in North Carolina, and it was very, very, I guess they spirited. There were lots of people that had very strong feelings and emotions tied to some of the actions that have been happening, and they were making their voices heard in that moment. Grassroots initiatives, even such as things like organizations that we're a part of, even like the NAACP, or even other community organizations that may also have a voice in helping to amplify voices that have been silenced because of a lot of the dismantling of these processes. And also there are people that are making phone calls on a daily basis and holding our policymakers and our politicians accountable for their actions. And also just investing in alternative forms of support in terms of community-based organizations, grassroots initiatives. And I mean, some people have participated in things like economic blackouts or boycotts and other things that try to help get the message out that people are not satisfied, people are not happy with the idea that the government is not just lifting their support, but they're really going a long way to dismantle and to unpack and to totally destroy any success that may have been won by using DEI as an initiative. And not that DEI was the goal. And in this, that's another thing that we can talk about, and I'm happy to have that conversation, but DEI is never the goal. DEI was simply a tool that was used to try to help achieve respect for diversity, a move towards a more equitable and sustaining environment, and a more inclusive environment where everyone feels like they have a sense of belonging. In conclusion, I just want to say, while many of these programs have received a significant setback, we have to continue to underscore the relationship between social justice and the erasure of DEI, or the dismantling of DEI, and that this social injustice is not just impacting African-American families, but even though it does impact them disproportionately, as we've kind of talked about a little bit, but what it also does is impacting women, children, people that are differently abled, first generation, students and individuals, and people that are female body. I think, I don't know if I said that. So it's also affecting a very wide range and has an opportunity to affect others as well. And so that was the end of my presentation. And I wanted to see if anyone had any questions for me, or if that's not the order that you wanted to go in. Mr. Branham, I'm happy to yield till after the other speakers have gone.
I think, thank you for that presentation. It was quite extensive. Like I said before, and we've had someone join us, that is Mr. Philip Scott. He's the president of the North Charleston NAACP branch. I should say NAACP branch. So more people are coming on. What I'd like to do is save the questions for after everybody speaks.
Okay, absolutely.
Because, you know, Mr. Malkin has waited patiently.
Yes, he is. Thank you.
Okay. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Malkin, who is the Director of Advocacy for the American Civil Liberties Union of South Carolina. And he'll be discussing anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion legislation in South Carolina. Okay, a very important topic for us in South Carolina, as you understand, Dr. Patterson.
Good evening. Good evening, and thank you for having me. And I apologize apologize in advance if I just parrot Dr. Patterson less eloquently at some point during the presentation. A little bit about me. Following college, I went to teach middle school and high school math in New Orleans East, where I taught Black, Honduran, and Vietnamese students for 5 years. So it was a very interesting and diverse student population. Really opened my eyes to a world I had never seen before as a young white man growing up in the North. Then went to law school, which was a questionable decision. Um, and in my final semester, I took critical race theory. I took the actual legal class, critical race theory. So when I landed at the ACLU of South Carolina, we were in the midst of that, the critical race theory craze, right? Which was just the dog whistle for the attack on Black history. I realized that I did not enjoy practicing law. Lawsuits take a long time, and if you file the lawsuit, it means that harm has already occurred. So I just really dug into what was happening around the country when it came to state house and federal attacks on critical race theory. And I was lucky enough to run into my close friends and partners in the Charleston area, the E3 Foundation, who folks on this call might be familiar with. And along with the E3 Foundation, the Low Country Black Parents Association, and the Legal Defense Fund, we started a coalition called Pro Truth South Carolina. And I will drop the link in the chat for y'all. And for the past 3 years, we've been all over this state, talking to folks about the legislative attacks on Black history in the K through 12 classroom. And I'm really happy to report that for 3 years, we successfully stopped the South Carolina General Assembly from passing a CRT bill. And if you look at a map of where these bills have passed, every state around us has passed a critical race theory bill, and South Carolina still has not, and we will not this year. But because other states passed this bill, the next step in this iteration of white supremacy was the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as Dr. Patterson was saying, these kind of started, I think we saw them in state houses for the first time a year or two ago, and a lot of them kind of flew through. And last year, again, in South Carolina, thanks to a lot of mobilization and advocacy around this state, they did not pass an anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion bill in South Carolina. We knew it would be back, given what the agenda is at the federal level. So we are in the middle of fighting the fight at the State House. So I'll talk a little bit about our bill, and President Scott and Mr. Branham, I'll make sure I'll email you a fact sheet to send around to folks as well. It is a complete dismantling of any DEI office that is in a public school, a charter school, a publicly funded post-secondary learning institution, local government, state agency, and quasi-state agency, which are like 7 bodies I don't really understand myself. So the office can't exist. And then getting into some of Dr. Patterson's points, the rest of the bill really just goes on to attack efforts at equity. And I don't think we ever did equity correctly as a country, right? Ideally, equity is necessary to remedy past inequalities, which are built into the fabric of this country. But the idea that we can't have any sort of program that would increase young Black women's involvement in STEM, or we can't make sure that women are proportionally represented in the creation of artificial intelligence, and that we can't make sure that people of color are adequately represented in the field of medicine. The fact that we're maybe going to change how we talk about this like historically tragic treatment of doctors misunderstanding the pain tolerance of Black folks, right? I mean, beyond the language of this bill, which is sweeping in scope and problematic, and will shut down things like accelerators for minority and women-owned businesses by its very language. We have to remember that once a bill passes out of the State House, the language doesn't matter as much as the animus driving it. So, do I think that our institutions lack the spine to protect everything they can? Yeah, I do. We're seeing them already crater to this animus. So even if instruction isn't listed in the language of the law, that animus, we know what that animus is about. That animus is about completely recodifying Jim Crow, as Dr. Patterson alluded to. So that's why it's always been my mindset and the mindset of our coalition that there's no way to compromise with this bill. When folks say, well, what if we did this? Wouldn't that make it better? Sometimes I'll hear that argument, but if it's not the legislators who make those determinations, it's going to be the institutions who are up against these bullies that they refuse to stand up to. So I always think that our legislators don't understand, or perhaps more sadly, do understand what the impact of the bill will be. But when we talk about the language of the bill and the legislation of it itself, I think it's always important to explain to folks who don't spend their lives as sadly as I do at the State House that it's not just the language of the bill, and it's really more the animus behind it. So I know that was a very kind of short summary of the bill, and I'd be happy to take questions on the bill or anything else about the coalition and the work that the coalition does. I will say our session ends May 9th. The bill will be debated in our full House this coming Wednesday. So there will be a press conference at 9:30, and then the debate will go all day. So if any folks are able to make it to Columbia or just happy to be in Columbia, we're inviting folks to join us. We're wearing black. We're going to be in the gallery to make sure our champions know that we are there and supporting them in their efforts all day long. But we are this year's legislative season is almost over, and the bill would still have to get through the Senate. So there is a world in which we are playing a game against the clock, and we might win this year. That definitely means we'll have to deal with it next year again. But any delay has to be seen as a win in South Carolina, and I do believe as they see the blowback and the unintended or intended consequences of these attacks at the federal level and in other states, I hope that our lawmakers will see, okay, this is what actually happens when we pass these attacks, and they will distance themselves from them. And that's what we were able to accomplish with the K through 12 history ban. So again, a very quick glimpse into a very dark mind, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Let me see. Okay, my speaker's on. I want to thank everybody who has joined. What I have a few questions. I'd like to ask several questions of both you and Dr. Patterson. I'd like to get Dr. Patterson's take, not to skip over you, Mr. Malkin, but Dr. Patterson's take on the dismantling of the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education, and how that affects what the subject is today. I know it's a little bit far field, but the reason I'm asking the question is that it seems that everything involving education is being attacked in general, DEI in particular. Do you see this as a societal shift? I guess that's a question for both of y'all. Is this a societal shift? And how do we affect, I don't want to say pushback, but how do we affect changes that push back against this onslaught of revisionism? And I say that revisionism in terms of the MAGA movement. Okay, I can see Mr. Malcolm just shared the file to the meeting. Please take a look at it, everyone.
Yeah. Um, I'm happy to jump in there and try and respond a little bit. First of all, I really enjoyed that presentation, Mr. Malkin. It was very informative, and I appreciate you sharing your expertise and with all of us, but with me in particular, because every opportunity I can get to learn something new, I'm always trying to do that. Um, as far as the attempt to dismantle the Department of Education, I think that it's strategic. Again, like many of these executive orders, we're seeing that they are aimed at not dismantling all parts of education, not everything that it does, or not all parts of DEI, not the parts of DEI that protect, for example, um, the ability to have sororities and fraternities that are exclusionary and accept only men or only women. But so only some organizations are being impacted. But like that, the dismissing the Department of Education, like sort of crumbles the ability of many students who need it the most to access financial aid. And to have an equitable opportunity to access resources that may be housed under a federal umbrella. I think by turning it back over to the states, we do leave room for states to be partial and to lean towards whatever their politics lean towards, and to provide only opportunities for or a disproportional opportunities for students who fall within the under the umbrella of similar policies and that have similar beliefs as the policymakers, and those that do not or have access to that to really, have them miss out on information, miss out on resources, and to not have an equal starting place. And that was really all that many of those laws were intended to do, and to kind of create a space where um, it was not partial, it was kind of impartial when it came down to politics, and that people just were about providing resources. Like, for example, if you think about it, people that provide resources to aid, how aid was kind of unilaterally cut without thinking about the consequences to people that need it the most. And aid was something that was given to all, regardless of their ability to pay for it, or regardless of, they didn't say what's your party affiliation when you came to get aid. They just distributed the aid. And so very much like that with the federal government, that's how they were with distributing financial aid for students in higher education, especially. They just distributed it based on the need of the student. But I think leaving it to the states is going to definitely create opportunities for the distribution to be to be more partial and less impartial. And I'll turn it over to Josh and let him add to that. But that's kind of my thoughts from the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah,
Josh?
I wish it felt more revolutionary. I think that they're just okay being racist out loud again. And I think that this may sound fringe, but I think it's becoming increasingly mainstream. And I always err on the side of caution and warn folks about this so that we're not blindsided when we see it materialize in other sectors of our life. There's a white evangelical theory known as the Seven Mountain Mandate. And it's this belief that white evangelicals should control 7 key sectors of society. And I always miss a few, but it's education, family, government, media, arts and entertainment, religion, and I knew I was going to miss one. But what was once fringe is now extremely well funded. I think we will see, we're seeing it manifest in these drives to have the 10 Commandments up in classrooms. We're seeing it in drives to have chaplains in schools. We're seeing it in drives to demonize kids who are LGBTQ. We will see it in the attacks on gay marriage. I think we're already kind of, we're already seeing the government attack news outlets that they are not, that present a perspective that diverges from their own. So it is, I think what's in the works is even scarier than what we're seeing. And knowing that, I think probably the Speaker of the House in Washington probably subscribes to this idea. I think you probably have at least one Supreme Court justice who subscribes to this idea. So I think while, my heart is definitely in education and educational equity, I want folks to be prepared that this same animus is already and will continue to be in every sector of our life. So we are definitely living in a terrifying time, and I get frustrated when folks quote Dr. King and say the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, because it doesn't happen by itself, right? Dr. King didn't believe in sitting back and just letting things happen, and I think we have so many folks in this moment who use that quote to say like, oh, this is a terrible time, but like the pendulum will swing back. Not if we don't push it. So again, things are scary. And my organization and our coalition is here to fight this fight as well as many others. But for all these folks who are, and I know that these are mostly white folks who kind of just, it took Trump getting reelected for them to wake up a little bit. But these mass protests where there's no ask of people, of officials, these town halls that Nancy Mace is just going to use as campaign material, that's not advocacy. That's not how we move the needle for change. So for folks who are interested in the different ways to engage with actual advocacy, again, our organization has an advocacy 101 on what's today's Monday, right? So on Wednesday evening, and we host them, I think, every other week.
Yes.
But we are here to bring, what's happening at the State House, that information out to people in communities around the state. We travel a lot. I was in 5 counties this weekend. And let folks know how they can engage. And similarly, we want to know what's going on with y'all. So I know what happens at Charleston County School Board meetings. I know what happens at Pickens County Library Board meetings, and we try to bring, our resources to those fights and fight alongside you in your community as well. Yeah, so just I'm privileged to be here. It was great to present alongside you, Dr. Patterson, and I hope this is the beginning of a much longer conversation and relationship.
Yes. I want to give you a shameless shout out. I have signed up for Advocacy 101. So I feel that I'm in the struggle. And this is a beginning. So I have another question. Does anybody else have any questions? Let me see. I got to do my screen. The 2 chats, please take a look at Mr. Malkin's, Josh's postings. What I have another question. Were you at the previous hearings debating on the first issue? I read that there was a good turnout by the youth councils and college councils of the NAACP. Do you have any, do you remember their talk? I would just like to encourage my fellow brethren in the struggle and sisters in the struggle, like Dr. Patterson.
So I meant to mention this, but at the committee hearing where they took public testimony, it was 4.5 hours of public testimony, and not a single person spoke in favor of the bill. I know that the president of the USC chapter of the NAACP spoke, but I didn't see the youth council there. I know in previous years, the
But
chapter from Clemson has been around. But I don't think they were as present as they've been in some previous years.
Okay, okay. I was just curious because um, Dr. Dr. Benton, Pastor Benton had made mention that they were uh, the USC presence was very strong there, and they had support. So I just wanted to add that since we are recording this. I have a question for both of you. How do you see us falling back to affirmative action, which is set law, in this struggle over DEI? Is that a firewall or is it not? Do we even erode precedent with affirmative action, which has already been eroded in the Supreme Court? And that's a question for both of you.
Well,
I kind of threw you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I definitely want to hear what Josh has to say about that in regards to, I mean, since he is a scholar of critical race theory, and a lot of the damage and the aiming and targeting has really been around, critical race theory. But I think, with rolling back of affirmative action, with that being one of the first targets, I think that was a soft target because of the composition of the Supreme Court during that time. And I think that it was something that, people were able to be convinced that somehow they were at risk because of affirmative action. But the rolling back of affirmative action, just like many other of the DEI efforts, it was only a placeholder. Like, affirmative action was just one of the means to the goal, again, to create a more equitable space for individuals and to erase some of the gaps that were there. So it was not meant to be a forever thing. I don't think that affirmative action was ever meant to be something set in place forever. We probably got comfortable with the idea of affirmative action as a stopgap method to keep individuals from, continuing to leaps and bounds, sort of disproportionately gain favor in a systemic way. But I do think that affirmative action in the way of sort of setting quotas should certainly have been something that was evaluated more closely, and that there should have been, more policies that have more teeth really in place that are going to do more to sort of level that playing field, which a lot of equity efforts really helped women, helped people with disabilities, helped LGBTQ more than it actually helped African American people, who it was kind of designed to create opportunities because they just weren't getting opportunities. And so if you look at it, like, the law had to be passed. There had to be legal legislation passed in order to make people provide opportunities equally. And so now that law has been lifted. And so I think now what we would like to see is that, we've grown so accustomed and we've learned the error of our ways. And so we'll just do that as people. But I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing is that that is not the case. Unless people do have that threat of some type of legal repercussion, getting put in jail or sanctions against their business or their operation, then a lot of times people don't move. And so the only other thing that's going to be able to change hearts and minds, I believe, are the stories of people who have been discriminated against, who have suffered mistreatment due to discrimination and oppression. And so I think that that is the other part, the only other thing other than legislation that can change people's hearts and minds. And I'll yield to Josh.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add. I think, yeah, no notes.
I guess she kind of spot on. Spot on.
Yeah, but from
Yeah.
the critical race theory, I mean, affirmative action, definitely. I mean, do you believe, Josh, that it was something that was, I mean, based on your studies, something that, was intended? I mean, critical race theory, I understand, is just a framework and a concept and a way of sort of understanding how race impacts folks. So I understand that probably better than a lot of other people that are like, oh, tear it down, tear it down. It's just a way of seeing things. It's a perspective. You can't tear it down. It's a concept. It exists. But the idea of affirmative action, why do you think, as an attorney or person who studied the law, that they started there with affirmative action?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that Justice Thomas's insistence on that we've reached color blindness, um, I think affirmative action was an easier target, as you were saying. I also think there was some language in the original case where Justice O'Connor said we should be good in 25 years. Like, maybe there was a world in which we actually prioritize racial equity. And like you said, affirmative action wouldn't be a necessary access to opportunity to combat centuries of systemic inequality. Um, but yeah, I agree. It was unfortunately kind of an easy target. And I think you did have a lot of white parents and white students complaining. I do think it's interesting that in that decision, the justices went out of their way to say that diversity, equity, inclusion were necessary at West Point and in our military, right? And that since then they refused to hear a challenge for I want to say like a selective middle school in Virginia, maybe, that was also considering applicants' race and making sure that there was a diverse student body. Um, so I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Dr. Patterson, but I do. I'm worried, right? Because the way things are happening now and the way folks are going after private business and the way that the social media has allowed, one right-wing influencer to like take down Starbucks commitment to DEI, it's just terrifying that our Fortune 500 companies won't stand up to, it's really, yeah, I wish we saw more institutional courage and it seems to be lacking.
Yeah, I think it's going to really revert back to personal courage. I think the courage is going to have to be grassroots. It's going to have to come from organizations like NAACP, organizations like ACLU, like the ones that you're involved in and that you lead. I think it's also going to just come from people that understand that they can't be silent, because there was a poem that was written, and I can't think of the name of it right now, but I mean, it talks about, they came for this group first, and I didn't speak up and I didn't say anything because it wasn't my group. And so then they came for another group and I didn't speak up and say anything because that wasn't my group either. And then they came for me ultimately, and there was nobody left to speak up. And so the thing about it is we can't wait until we are personally impacted, because right now I can guarantee you that it's impacting somebody you know and love. It's impacting someone you know and love and care about, whether it is through the immigration laws that are being passed and the procedures and the inhumane ways that immigrants are being treated when we are a country of immigrants, which is just embarrassing when you think about that's how we all got here. No one but Native Americans were already here. And so to say that, we all sort of traveled here to get here and we were a country of immigrants. So the way that we're treating people and the way that we've been encouraged to treat one another, and what's being winked at. I think I agree with Josh that it is a very scary time, and that we're going to have to educate ourselves, as Mr. Branham said earlier, but we also are going to have to stand together and to realize the strength that comes across coalition building and across collaboration with others who might not necessarily share our same cause, but we all share the cause of wanting humanity to be better. And as a result of that, we want our country to do better.
I would like to thank both of you for having a lively discussion. Uh, what I'd like to do now, uh, I would like to put on share screen uh, a posting that speaks to, uh, let's see if I can get it up. There we go. Okay. That speaks to us coming together. Like I said, this is being recorded. Uh, I hope you can see it on your screen, everyone. Uh, I'll read it out loud and then I'll let the session end. NAACP North Charleston information, national website for membership, call and ask for North Charleston branch membership. And then that's the website. The annual membership is $30. We have 20 membership-led committees in each branch. Contact me, Charles Branham. That's my number, general meeting information. Come and see what we're doing before joining. And then and I want to make a note of this for everyone, including the speakers. I took the liberty of creating a YouTube channel. So I'll be sharing that with the speakers as well as members of the North Charleston branch. So, and the recording shall be downloaded to the YouTube channel, so we'll have a permanent record. I hope that you consider subscribing and maybe even uploading material to it. Uh, with that being noted, it is 8 o'clock. May God bless you. Thank you again for joining us and have a good evening.
Thanks for having me,
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr.
Right.
Patterson.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, Shantae. You made it at the end. I'm gonna stay online, so Shantae, you can take my number here. I'll read it to you, Shantae. 843-853-1775. You can call me. We have a YouTube channel. It should be downloaded shortly where you'll be able to pick up the discussion. Okay? Wait a minute, I got something on my thing. Oh, you're still there, Shantae. Okay. You can speak to me, Shantae, if you want to.
Oh, sorry.
That's all
No,
right.
I really, Mr. Charles, I'm sorry. I thought it was at 8 because I was like, I'm gonna log on. And then when I went back to my email, I was like, oh my gosh, it was 7. So for
I'm glad to
future,
see
I'm
you.
just gonna plug it into my calendar so I can just have it alert me.
There'll be others. Uh,
Yes.
yes. So uh, also take down the YouTube channel that you
Yes.
can see. Okay, it'll be going up there. The whole discussion will be going up there.
Okay, and I'll definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel so I can stay up to date with everything.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Okay.
All right. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay,
Thank
definitely.
you, Mr. Charles.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Well, is it safe for us to talk, President Scott? Or do you want me to call you? Let me end it. Okay. Let's see.